The shovel struck frozen earth with a jarring clang, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the howling wind. Snowflakes danced like ghosts around the lone figure hunched in the storm, each movement stiff with cold and something else, grief maybe. He paused, breath misting in the frigid air, then leaned into another swing. The grave was nearly done. Jedediah Cole wasn't a man used to prayer, but something about the stillness of the mountains, the purity of snow untouched by blood, made him feel like the world was listening. He'd found her, whoever she was, curled at the base of a half-dead pine, wrapped in an old horse blanket stiff with frost, fingers curled like she'd been clinging to something long after death took her. He didn't ask questions. The frontier had ways of swallowing people whole: bandits, blizzards, starvation, regret. Sometimes all four. He just started digging. That's what you did when you found the dead. You put them to rest and moved on. His hands, wrapped in leather and rawhide, gripped the shovel with familiar tension. Years of bounty hunting had made him strong, but nothing made this kind of work easy. The snow resisted like it wanted to keep her. The wind screamed louder. He cursed under his breath and kept digging. By the time the grave was deep enough, the storm was coming down hard, visibility shrinking with every passing minute. Jed knelt beside the body, brushing snow from her face. She was young, no older than 20, and her skin was the color of cold wax. Lips parted slightly like the last thing she did was try to speak. There was blood on her dress, dried in rust-colored smears. He didn't know if it was hers. He moved slowly, reverently. No ceremony, no scripture. Just the silence of the wilderness and the sound of snow settling. He lifted the body, lighter than it should have been, and lowered it into the grave. Then he heard it. A sound so out of place it didn't register at first. Faint, muffled. A high, wet gasp, almost like a cry. Jed froze. For one long second, the wind was the only noise, shrieking like some distant banshee. Then it came again. The soft, unmistakable wail of an infant. He dropped to his knees, heart slamming in his chest. He pulled at the blanket she'd been wrapped in, fingers fumbling, breath catching. There, curled against the dead woman's belly, was a baby. Barely swaddled, skin flushed red from the cold, but alive. Crying. Tiny fists beating weakly at the air. "Son of a bitch," Jed whispered. The baby wailed louder, as if offended by the profanity. Jed stared stunned. He glanced back at the grave, at the girl now half covered in snow, her arms empty. "You're hers, ain't you?" The baby hiccuped, let out another cry. He scooped the child up with hands that had once held pistols steady in shootouts, now trembling. The infant squirmed but didn't resist. Eyes squeezed shut, breath ragged, but fighting. Fighting. Jed stood, blinking through the snow. He looked down the slope, toward the narrow trail that led back to his cabin. 10 miles of brutal terrain. Wolves. No guarantees. He looked at the shovel. Then the grave. Then the baby. "You weren't meant to be buried today," he muttered. "That's clear enough." He took a few steps away from the grave, then turned back. With one arm holding the baby close, he grabbed the shovel and began covering the body. The wind pulled at his coat, tugged at the edge of the blanket around the child. He worked quickly, more roughly now, urgency building with every passing moment. When the grave was covered and a small cross of sticks marked the spot, Jed stood again. Snow was already erasing his tracks. In hours it would be like she'd never been there. The baby whimpered against his chest. He adjusted the blanket around it, shielding its face. "Don't die on me now, little one. I don't need another ghost on my back." He turned and started down the mountain. His name was Jedediah Cole. Most folks just called him Jed. Years back, his name rang through frontier towns like a warning shot. Bounty hunter, gunslinger, man with nothing to lose. He'd made his fortune hunting other men, and lost more than he'd bargained for. A wife who couldn't forgive what he did for a living. A child he never got to hold. He buried them both in a different snow years ago. Now he lived alone in a cabin he built with his own hands, miles from the nearest soul. He'd planned to die out there one day, quiet and unseen. But plans, like peace, never held long in the West. The descent was brutal. The snow had softened with the storm, hiding jagged rocks and slippery ice. Jed moved with purpose, watching the baby's face every few steps to make sure it hadn't turned too pale. He could feel the cold leaching into his bones, even beneath his heavy coat. At the halfway point, he stopped beneath a rocky overhang to catch his breath. He sat, pulled the baby close, and unwrapped the blanket slightly to check on it. Girl. No more than a few days old, pink-cheeked and scowling like she already hated the world. Jed chuckled, the sound rasping in his throat. "You look like you got opinions already," he murmured. She blinked up at him, blue eyes cloudy and unfocused. "You ain't got a name, do you?" he asked. "Hell, maybe you do." But she took it with her. He looked out across the valley. The storm was slowing, but dusk was coming fast. "I'll call you Hope," he said. "If you make it, that's what you'll be. A damn miracle." She yawned, then dozed, her breath warm against his chest. Jed adjusted the blanket again and resumed his march. Night fell before he reached the cabin. The sky cleared just enough to reveal a scattering of stars, pale and distant. The cabin stood silent and dark, smoke long gone from its chimney. He pushed open the door with his shoulder and stepped into the cold, musty air inside. The firewood was damp but usable. Within minutes, the hearth crackled with flame. He laid Hope in a crate lined with wool and sat back heavily on a wooden chair. His ribs ached. His hands throbbed. But his mind was sharper than it had been in years. She had lived. She had lived. He didn't know what came next. Maybe she had people looking for her. Maybe whoever left her out there wanted her dead. He couldn't think that far ahead yet. For now it was warmth. No. Safety. The baby stirred, muled. He found a clean tin cup, poured warm goat's milk into a rag and let her suckle. Her tiny hands clung to his thumb like a lifeline. He stared down at her, lost in the weight of it. The West had taken so much from him. Now, without asking, it had handed something back. When she was asleep, Jed sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. The wind howled outside, but the room was still. Warm. He picked up a small piece of wood and began carving, something he hadn't done in years. Hope shifted in her crate but didn't wake. He looked at her and something in his chest cracked open. Not painfully. Just enough to let something through. "You get some sleep, Hope," he murmured. "Tomorrow we find out what the hell you're doing out here, and who's gonna come knocking when they find out you ain't dead." Outside the storm passed. Inside a fire burned. And in the cradle of new life and old grief, a broken man began to rise. The morning light was weak and watery, filtered through thin cloud and snow-caked window panes. Jed stirred the ashes in the hearth until a flame rose again, slow and reluctant. The baby, Hope, lay bundled in a blanket beside the fire, small enough to fit in the hollow of his arm, yet heavy enough to shift the direction of his entire life. She hadn't made a sound all night except a soft snore like the faint whistle of wind under a door. For a frontier man used to silence, that little sound was the loudest thing he'd heard in years. Jed watched her sleep, the corners of his mouth twitching toward a smile that never quite arrived. The cabin smelled of smoke and sweat and old timber. It wasn't much, but it was dry. Warm. A place to breathe. He hadn't expected to wake up with someone depending on him again, not after what happened in Missouri. He pulled his coat on, thick canvas stiff from the cold. Outside, the world was painted in white and blue, the sharp scent of pine carried on the air. It was still dangerous, cold enough to kill, still enough to feel like the whole world had stopped, but it was survivable. For him. For a baby? That was another story. They had to move. The woman, Hope's mother, whoever she'd been, hadn't wandered into that pass by accident. Jed couldn't shake the feeling she'd been running from something. Or someone. Maybe she died escaping it. If that something was still out there, it would be looking for what she left behind. And right now, what she left behind was cooing softly and trying to chew on her own fingers. Jed dug out an old satchel and lined it with wool, tucking Hope inside with a hot stone wrapped in flannel to keep her warm. He'd made the same kind of setup for wounded men back in the war, quick heat that wouldn't burn. He adjusted the strap across his chest and felt her weight settle against him. "You're lighter than a sack of beans but 10 times the trouble, you know that?" he muttered. Hope responded with a hiccup. He wasn't taking her back into town. No doctor, no lawman, no orphanage. Not yet. There was a place he knew, Redemption. Once a mining town, now half abandoned. Still had a chapel, a water well, and a woman named Clara who owed him her life. If anyone could keep a baby alive off the grid for a spell, it was Clara. Assuming she didn't shoot him on sight. The trail to Redemption was rough, a half-forgotten deer path winding through frozen forest and shale. Jed moved fast, instincts sharp, every footstep calculated. Snow muffled most sounds, but it also hid danger. More than once, he paused, listening to the silence, fingers hovering near the revolver on his hip. The Colt had seen better days, but it still barked like thunder when needed. A mile in they came across wolf tracks. Big ones. Fresh. He kept walking. Hope slept most of the time, stirring only to let out a short wail or sneeze into his coat. Each time Jed checked her face, color good, breath steady. She was tougher than she looked. She'd survived a blizzard after all. Born into frost, wrapped in death but still kicking. That counted for something. By noon the sky turned to pewter. Snow fell again, light but steady, like the earth didn't want to give up its grip on winter. Jed kept going, legs burning, lungs aching. At the edge of a frozen creek, he paused to catch his breath. He knelt beside a fallen log and set the satchel down gently. "You and me gotta talk," he said to the bundle. Hope blinked at him, cheeks rosy, thumb drifting toward her mouth. "I ain't no nursemaid. I'm not made for this." He hesitated. "But I'll get you where you need to go. Then I'm done. That's the deal." She sucked her thumb and kicked her feet in answer. He shook his head. "You're not even negotiating, are you?" They crossed the creek just as the sun slipped behind the trees. That's when he saw the smoke. Then, sure, wrong. He moved faster now, sliding along the edge of the ridge, keeping low. Up ahead, the trail curved around a bend, and just beyond that, 3 horses, 2 men, and a campfire. The men looked like road trash, greasy coats, rifles propped against a log, one laughing too loud while the other gutted a squirrel. Jed backed away slowly. He turned and veered off the path, cutting through a thicket that clawed at his coat and nearly tripped him twice. Hope whimpered once but stayed quiet. Maybe she felt his heart hammering. He followed a narrow ridge down into a gulch and climbed the opposite slope, legs trembling with exertion. When he reached the top, he stopped to catch his breath and felt it. That itch. That prickling behind the neck. Instinct flared. He turned just as the shot rang out. The bullet whistled past his head and punched into a tree behind him. He dropped, rolling to cover as the crack of the rifle echoed through the forest. "You see him?" one of the men shouted. "No. He's in the brush." Jed crawled to a boulder, unholstered the Colt, and counted to 3. Another shot. Closer. He leaned out and fired twice, one bullet snapping a branch, the other kicking up snow near the fire. Screams followed. He didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed the satchel and ran. Branches whipped at his face. Snow flew up from his boots. He didn't stop until the shouts faded and only the wind followed. Blood roared in his ears. He ducked beneath a rocky outcrop, chest heaving. Hope started to cry. He held her close, shushing her, pressing his face into the satchel to muffle the sound. The crying stopped as suddenly as it started. Just 2 lost souls hiding in the cold, trying not to be found. They stayed there until the light faded into dusk. He didn't know who those men were, but they weren't travelers. They were hunting. And that meant someone had put a price on something, or someone. Oh, it wasn't just instinct now. It was a certainty. The woman who died in the snow hadn't just been running. She'd been fleeing something organized, dangerous, and whatever it was had already caught her scent again. Jed stood, knees aching, and checked the baby once more. Still warm. Still breathing. They moved on. By the time they reached the edge of redemption, night had fallen completely. The town was a skeleton of its former self, one long street, buildings sagging under the weight of time. No lights, no voices. Just wind curling through broken shutters and dry grass. But one place was still alive. The saloon. A dim flicker in the window. Smoke trailing from the chimney. Jed crossed the street with slow, cautious steps and knocked twice on the door. A voice answered from within. "If you're a drunk, we're closed. If you're a ghost, you're late." "It's me, Clara." The silence stretched. Then the door creaked open a few inches. A face appeared in the gap, sharper than he remembered but unmistakable. Clara Delgado. Short dark hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes like a hawk with a secret. She didn't smile. "Well, hell," she said. "I figured you were dead." Jed adjusted the strap, revealing Hope's sleeping face. Clara's expression shifted. Not to softness, not yet, but something near it. "You brought me a problem, didn't you?" Jed nodded. "The kind that can't solve itself." Clara stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Warmth hit him like a wall, oil lamps glowing, the scent of old bourbon, and a stove crackling in the corner. He stepped inside, eyes darting around, nerves taut. He didn't trust safe places anymore. Clara shut the door behind him, locking it with a heavy iron bolt. "You got a story to tell?" she said. Jed looked down at Hope, who stirred in her sleep and let out a tiny sigh. "Yeah," he said. "But I got a feeling we'll be writing the rest of it together." And in the quiet, with snow falling beyond the windows and danger tightening its grip behind them, the fire between them began to burn, not with warmth, but with warning. The past was coming. And it wasn't coming alone. Jed awoke to the low creak of the saloon's floorboards, his hand already reaching for the revolver beneath his coat before his eyes even opened. The baby was still asleep beside the fire, bundled tight in Clara's old whiskey-smelling quilt. He loosened his grip, let out a breath, and pushed himself upright. His side throbbed where the bullet graze from the mountain trail had started to bruise into something uglier. Clara stood near the bar, back turned, stirring a pot of something that smelled faintly of beans, burnt pork, and the dust of a forgotten kitchen. She didn't turn around when she spoke. "You snore louder than I remember." "I wasn't asleep. Just thinking with my eyes shut." She chuckled, dry as sagebrush. "You always did lie bad." Jed rubbed his eyes and winced as his muscles protested. He looked at Hope. She was still, peaceful. And for a moment he wished that was enough, that peace could mean permanence. "How long was I out?" "Almost a full day," Clara said. She poured coffee into 2 chipped tin cups. "Long enough for your fever to break. You're lucky I had laudanum and some old compresses in the back." Jed took the cup she offered and sipped. It tasted like charcoal and regret. "I appreciate it." "I didn't do it for you," she said, voice flat. He looked up. Clara's gaze flicked toward the baby. "I did it for her." Silence passed between them, filled with the soft crackle of firewood and the distant moan of wind outside. Jed leaned forward, fingers running over the edge of the table. "I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door. But you did anyway." Clara's voice was cool but not cruel. "The girl. Her baby. What's the story?" Jed took another sip before answering. "I found the mother dead in a snowbank. Buried her. The baby was under the blanket. Alive. Barely." Clara's face didn't change. "You think she was running from someone?" "I don't think," Jed said. "I know. 3 men tried to ambush us on the trail. Don't know if they were after me or the kid. Maybe both." Clara nodded slowly, then crossed to the bar and pulled out a small bundle of papers. She unfolded one and laid it on the table in front of him. It was a telegram, the kind you didn't want to receive. The kind printed in hard ink, every word bitten with urgency. Jed read it once. Then again. Infant female, survivor, last seen North Pass. Substantial reward, live only. Dangerous father, wanted. Contact Elder Crane, Tombstone AT. His grip tightened on the page. "Crane. You know him?" Clara asked. Jed's mouth felt dry. "Elijah Crane. He's not a man. He's a wolf in a preacher's coat. Used to run with a bounty crew I rode with. Got rich selling people instead of catching them. Last I heard he was setting up a kind of righteous order down in Arizona. Hires killers who memorize Bible verses. And he wants the baby," Clara said. Jed nodded. "Yeah. And not for anything good." Clara folded the paper again, slow and deliberate. "Then you're not just running anymore, are you?" "I don't run," Jed said. "Not anymore." "Don't lie," she said gently. "You've been running since the day you let your wife die." Jed stood fast enough to rattle the tin cups on the table. His breath came hard, sharp in his chest. Clara didn't flinch. "I was there, Jed. Remember? I got the letter you never sent. The one where you said you stayed behind on a job because the money was better. Meanwhile, she died giving birth to a son who didn't make it past his first breath." The silence was leaden. Jed looked away, jaw tight. "I thought if I got one last bounty we could leave the frontier for good. Buy land near the river. Start over. I didn't know she was so close." Clara nodded slowly. "And now you've got another chance." "This ain't redemption," he said. "It's something else. Some twist of fate." Clara glanced toward the child. "Call it what you want. That baby's yours now, whether you asked for it or not." Jed sat back down, hands shaking. "She's gonna die if I don't protect her." Clara leaned over, lowering her voice. "Then protect her. But understand this, if Crane sent men after her, more will come. The West don't forgive the innocent. It devours them first." Jed's eyes narrowed. "Then we get ahead of him." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You planning to kill Elijah Crane?" "Planning to warn him," Jed said. "With blood." That night, they boarded up the windows and moved Hope to the root cellar, where the air was cold but safe. Jed cleaned his weapons, stripped them down and oiled each part with care. The Colt. A sawed-off he hadn't touched in years. Clara gave him a repeater that still had half a magazine of good rounds. When Hope cried, Jed didn't flinch. He held her, fed her, spoke in low tones that made her calm, even when the world outside wanted to come undone. By morning, fresh tracks showed up in the snow just beyond the edge of town. 3 horses. 4 riders. They hadn't come to drink. Jed spotted them from the bell tower of the chapel, rifle in hand. Clara was below, ready. She'd locked the saloon and hung a sign that said, "Dead inside," just to be poetic. "They don't know how many we got," she whispered when Jed returned. "Might be enough to scare him." Jed shook his head. "Crane's boys don't scare easy. They shoot first, then preach after. The first gunshot came near noon. Jed dropped the lead scout with a clean shot to the chest. The man never saw it coming. Then the others charged in. Snow exploded around them as bullets tore through dry wood, shutters splintered, glass shattered. Clara fired from the upper window, dropping another rider with a slug through the neck. Jed moved through the shadows like an animal, flanking the last two. One turned to run. Jed shot him through the spine. The final one raised his hands, blood on his mouth, eyes wide. "You don't understand," the man gasped. "Crane needs the girl. She's his blood. His daughter." Jed felt everything around him slow. "What did you say?" The man coughed. "He had a woman. Ranch girl. Said she shamed his holy name by keeping the child. Ran from him when she was 6 months gone. Been hunting her ever since." Jed's grip tightened on the revolver. "And you helped him?" The man nodded, eyes pleading. "We didn't hurt the woman. She just froze out there. We didn't know she was that far gone." Jed pulled the trigger. The man's body slumped into the snow. Later, when he returned to the saloon, Clara was already patching up the window. "She okay?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Didn't cry through the whole damn thing." Jed sat beside the fire and stared into the flames. "Crane's her father." Clara didn't speak, just sat beside him. Jed clenched his fists. "He thinks she's his to claim. Like she's property. Like she's his legacy." "She's yours now," Clara said. "You have to make a choice." He looked up, eyes hard as steel. "No. I already did." Outside the snow had stopped, but the fire had only just begun. The horse's hooves struck hard against the dry earth, kicking up dust that hung in the morning light like smoke. Jedediah Cole rode fast, one hand steady on the reins, the other wrapped around the rifle across his saddle. Behind him, a low rumble echoed in the hills, the kind of rumble that promised death. Redemption was no longer safe. Crane's men would come again. More of them. Meaner. And this time they wouldn't be riding in loud. They'd come like a whisper. A noose. He'd left Clara behind with hope. The saloon was boarded up tighter than a bank vault, every exit covered, the root cellar stocked with enough food and water to last a week. Clara was tougher than most men Jed had known. If anyone could keep hope alive, it was her. But this was something he had to do alone. Crane was down in Tombstone now, tucked behind a pulpit and an army of loyal thugs, spreading gospel and gunpowder in equal measure. The man had built a church with bullets and baptized sinners in blood. And he wanted hope not because of love, but because she was leverage. A blood heir. Proof that even his sins could be bent into power. Jed couldn't let that happen. Not again. The last time he'd stood between an innocent and a madman, it cost him everything. He'd hesitated. Just long enough for the fire to take hold, for the screams to start, for the smoke to rise. And by the time he'd made it back to that cabin in Missouri, there was nothing left but ash and a baby's wooden rattle, charred black and hollow. This time there would be no hesitation. The ride took a day and a half. He stopped only to water the horse and sleep for minutes at a time, back against a stone wall, rifle across his lap. By the time the jagged peaks of Tombstone came into view, the skin beneath his coat was raw with sweat and grit. But his eyes burned with clarity. He stabled the horse outside town. Walked in slow. Like he belonged. Hat low. Duster trailing in the dust. The town hadn't changed. Still the same crooked boardwalks, the same leaning saloon signs, the same stench of heat, whiskey, and fear. But something darker pulsed beneath it now. Everyone here served a purpose. Or they didn't last long. Jed passed the old jailhouse, converted into something called the House of Correction. A few bruised faces peered out between the slats. He kept walking. Crane's Chapel loomed at the end of the street, built atop the ruins of a burned-out hotel. Whitewashed boards. Tall, clean steeple. Stained glass windows depicting saints with rifles. Crosses twisted into stars. Inside they were already singing. He stepped through the door and into the cold hush of artificial holiness. Pews full of ragged men and veiled women, all facing the pulpit where a tall figure stood in black robes, arms outstretched. "Elijah Crane," Jed said, voice cutting through the hymn like a blade. The singing stopped. Heads turned. Crane's smile was slow, reptilian. "Brother Cole," he said, stepping down from the pulpit with the grace of a man who thought he owned the floor. "You've come a long way. But you've brought the wrong child." Jed didn't answer. He looked around. 6 men stood at the edges of the chapel, hands twitching near pistols. Trained dogs. Waiting for the signal. Crane came closer, hands spread in mock welcome. His face was lined with time, but his eyes were still sharp. Still hungry. She's mine, Jedediah. By birthright. Blood don't lie. Jed's jaw clenched. Blood doesn't give you claim. It gives you responsibility. You gave that up when you left her mother to die in the snow. I gave that girl a path to salvation, Crane said, voice rising. She rejected it. She stole from me. That child is the last link to my redemption. You don't want redemption, Jed said. You want control. Crane's face hardened. Then you've made your choice. Jed moved first. The first two guards didn't have time to blink. His Colt barked twice and they dropped in unison. Screams erupted. Crane fell backward, diving behind the pulpit as the rest of his men scrambled for cover. Bullets tore through the chapel, splintering pews, shattering stained glass, setting hymnals ablaze. Jed rolled behind a column, reloading with steady hands. One shot caught him in the shoulder, clean pass-through. Pain flared sharp and hot. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. He took out another guard by the altar, the man tumbling backward into a basin of holy water. Outside, the church bells rang. Inside, hell roared. Smoke filled the air. Crane's voice shouted something over the gunfire, orders, curses, scripture. It was all the same. Jed didn't care. He pushed forward, ducking beneath pews, flanking the last two guards at the side. One turned and raised a shotgun. Jed put a bullet through his eye. The other dropped his gun and ran. Only Crane remained. Jed stepped up to the pulpit. Crane stood behind it, panting, blood on his sleeve, pistol shaking in his hand. You've killed my flock, Crane spat. They were never yours to begin with, Jed growled. Crane raised his pistol. Jed shot first. The bullet slammed into Crane's hand, sending the weapon spinning. The preacher dropped to his knees, clutching his wrist, eyes wide with disbelief. Jed stood over him, panting, blood dripping from his shoulder. She's not your legacy, he said. She's her mother's hope. My promise. And your damnation. Crane looked up. Kill me and you become me. Jed stared at him. Then holstered his gun. No. I already did. He turned and walked away as Crane screamed behind him, curses echoing off the stone walls. Jed didn't look back. Outside, Tombstone burned behind him. The townsfolk watched from windows, silent and scared. He mounted his horse and rode without stopping. By the time he returned to Redemption, night had fallen again. The saloon was quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney. He dismounted, limped to the door and knocked twice. Clara opened it, pistol in hand. Jed nodded once. It's done. She stepped aside. He entered. Hope lay sleeping in her crate, thumb in her mouth. Jed dropped to his knees beside her, tears burning in his eyes. Clara knelt beside him. You made it back. Barely, he whispered. She touched his good shoulder gently. So now what? Jed looked at Hope, then up at Clara. Now we raise her. Clara blinked. We. He nodded. If you'll have us. She smiled. For real this time. Hope stirred, blinking up at him. Jed reached down, picked her up, held her close. You're safe now, he whispered. Outside the wind had died. And in the heart of the wild, something new began to grow, quiet, stubborn, and unbreakable.